Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. It's Beth Goody from Goody Goods, and today I have another foundation paper piecing video for you. So today I'm going to be sharing 10 of my favorite tips for foundation paper piecing, so let's get right into it. So tip number 1, save your scraps. If you're doing traditional piecing a lot, you're going to have a ton of little tiny pieces of fabric. Save all of your scraps because you can use those for foundation paper piecing. A lot of FPP patterns will have tiny little pieces, and so even the smallest thing that you think might be worth just tossing, save it. And I even organize all of my scraps into rainbow order, so when I'm looking for a specific color, it's very easy to go to that drawer, pick it out, and find the best piece of fabric for that section of my pattern. So let me show you. I just got done cutting some fabric for a quilt that I'm working on, and I have some scraps. So you know what? I'm not going to throw these away. I'm going to put these in my pink bin, in my yellow bin, and then there's even, you know, little tiny ones. So you can save all of this. You never know when you're gonna need a little bit of scraps. Tip number 2, cut bigger than you think you need. Nothing is worse than cutting smaller and then sewing it on and having to seam rip or realizing it's too small. Always cut bigger than you think you will. It gives you a little bit of wiggle room, especially when you're starting out. So my rule of thumb is always cut bigger. And this is really important for patterns that don't have pre-cutting instructions. Some patterns will give you certain measurements to cut out to use for your FPP patterns, but a lot of them won't. So you're really just cutting into your fabric and trying to make things work. So always cut bigger. It's going to save you some tears in the long run. Tip number 3, speaking of seam ripping, I have the best tip for you if you are doing FPP. You know that seam ripping FPP can be a pain in the booty. Because you have the shortened stitch length to 1.5 or lower, taking those tiny little stitches out can be very tedious and can alter your paper, making it rip or fall out or any of that, and we do not want that for FPP. Those lines give us precise piecing. It gives us accurate points. So if your paper is altered and falling out, then you can't continue on. So a great way to seam rip with FPP, if you have to, is to use masking tape on the underneath of your block. I lay this down on the paper side, and then I very carefully seam rip on the fabric side, and then I pull it out. This keeps your paper intact so that there's no moving, shifting, ripping, none of that. This will save you. Another way to avoid seam ripping is if you have very large sections that you're joining together, lengthen your stitch length to like 2.5 or 3. Sew that line together, open it up to make sure that your points are accurately joined where they need to. Close it back up, shorten your stitch length, and go back over that. That's a great way to ensure you have proper alignment before you commit to the 1.5 stitch length. Tip number 4 is to label your templates. Sometimes your patterns will not have labels as to what parts are what. Some pattern designers will include these labels and will have, you know, sky or grass or shirt, and sometimes they don't. So it's really useful to take a pen before you start and write in the pieces of fabric that you're going to be using. I like to use abbreviations so that it doesn't get too cluttered on my template. So if I have a background section, I'll put BG, and if I'm using a dark green fabric, I'll put DG. And so it's really helpful to label your templates so that you're not constantly referencing the pattern as you go. It'll go much quicker and it's going to save you some time. Tip number 5, print one sheet of your pattern first before you commit to the whole thing. It's going to save you paper and ink. Sometimes when you print out your patterns, they come out inaccurate. The scaling could go wrong. Maybe there's a mess up with your printer or the settings were different than they should be. Always print one sheet of your pattern first, make sure that it's accurate, and then go back and print the rest of it so that way you're not wasting paper and your time. Next tip is to invest in a mini iron. I have 2 recommendations for you. The Steam Fast iron and the mini Oliso iron are fantastic. It is very helpful to have a mini ironing station nearby your sewing machine. It's going to help you because each step you're either finger pressing, seam rolling with your little roller, or you're ironing. And I choose to iron each step because I find that it lets my block lay super flat. So I usually have my mini wool ironing mat close to my machine, and that helps me be able to work in the same space and there's less shifting around in the sewing area. So my next tip is to use separate rotary cutters. So you're cutting through paper, it's going to dull your blade quicker. And so if you're doing a lot of traditional piecing and FPP piecing, it is helpful to have two rotary cutters, one for your FPP and one for your traditional piecing. You will find that you're replacing your blades a little less often, and it just works out a lot better for me. I like knowing that my blade is going to cut through my fabric for traditional piecing without any problems, and I can keep it a little bit duller on the paper side, and it still works out. Tip number 9. It is kind of related to your rotary blades, because not only do your rotary blades dull out with paper, so do your needles. So a great tip for you is to change your needle frequently when you're doing FPP. That paper is going to wear down your needle, and if you switch between traditional and FPP, that needle's not going to go through your fabric as well. So make sure you get a bunch of needles. I like to buy them in bulk off of Amazon so that I can just easily replace them and not have to worry about going to the store all the time. So please replace your needles. Your sewing machine will thank you. Tip number 10. Okay, let's talk about FPP paper. We know it can be very expensive. Some of my favorites to use are the Carol Dokes paper, and I really enjoy the Quietplay paper. There are so many options out there. There's vellum paper, there's newsprint that you can buy cheap from Amazon, but you know what? If you don't want to have an additional expense for your craft, because we know quilting is expensive already, if you want to skip that altogether, just use regular copy paper. It works just as well as the specialized FPP paper. Alright, and here is my bonus tip of the video. I have mentioned this in a previous video, but my favorite thing to do when doing FPP is gluing down my pieces. A little goes a long way, and you really want to be careful when you're working with lighter fabrics, because sometimes at the very end when you rip the paper off, if you put too much, that paper is going to adhere to your fabric, you're not going to be able to remove it, and then you're going to see it on the underneath of your project. So you do not want that. Just a small layer of glue goes a long way to make sure that your long, weird, angled sections of your pattern aren't flapping around while you're trying to join it. I just really think that it keeps everything secure, and I'm able to get an accurate join when I use my glue for those stubborn little pieces. Another tip is make sure you have a trash can nearby, because the paper and the tiny little bits of fabric that gets cut off from your pattern, they add up and it gets a bit crazy. So I like to have a trash can right next to me when I'm doing my foundation paper piecing, so that I can use my ruler and just scrape it on into the trash before it gets all over the floor. So that is all I have for you guys today. I really hope that you found these tips helpful. Please let me know how your FPP journey is going, and let me know if there are any other videos you'd like to see from me. I am planning to do a lot of FPP videos. You know I love FPP. I love foundation paper piecing. So I am just hoping that I'm able to share with you guys some valuable information and you can grow in your FPP journey with me. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Ring that little bell if you want notifications for my lives or video updates. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!